Hi, this is Mr. Smith, and in this video I want to talk to those of you who have had some major struggles in math, maybe in particular algebra. Maybe you've had some really bad experiences, maybe you come in with a lot of anxiety. So the question is, how do you overcome that? I really don't want college algebra to be that course that stops you from reaching your goal. For a number of students, that has been the case. And if you think about it, think back into your past. I'm sure there's some places where you worked really hard and you came up short, but you were okay with that because you knew that you at least tried your best and it was time to adjust. Like for me, I wanted to be a Major League Baseball player. Unfortunately, I didn't have the skill, so I had to adjust. But anyway, all to say, I've also had some experiences where I know I could have done better, I could have worked harder, and I do have some regrets that I didn't do a better job through those experiences. Maybe some things would have been different. But all to say, you don't want to be looking back in 20 years and think, man, I really wanted to do that. And you know what? I really didn't work that hard to get through that silly college algebra class. So that's my challenge to you is to set yourself up for success this session and do everything you can to try to pass this course. And if you end up moving on to something different, that's fine, especially if you know that you tried everything you could, or at least you did your best. But at the same time, you don't want to easily dismiss this college algebra thing and then later on look back and have regrets. So here's my challenge to you. I would say if you want to get through this course, you're going to have to change your approach and you're probably going to have to adjust your attitude a little bit. What I mean by that is if you're one of those people that goes around and says, I'm just not good at math, well, I've had many students that were just not good at math, but they found that when they, for one thing, we're not as mature when we're in high school. We get to college, we've grown up a little bit. Maybe we're a little more motivated now because we have a little bit of an idea of what we want to do, or somebody's paying for us to be here, maybe ourselves. But all to say, when you get a second chance to do something and you really put your mind to it, you might surprise yourself. So here's some things I would encourage you to do. Number one, you should make it your goal to get off to a strong start. You want to do well on the first test. So the big challenge is not to procrastinate. Because when we're doing something that's hard, that's difficult, we're not all that excited about, it's easy to procrastinate. On the other hand, you could probably think of some things that you've done where you're like, you just went after it, you attacked it. And then you maybe even surprised yourself at what you were able to accomplish. That's the attitude you need to have. I'm going to attack this. Failure is not an option. I'm going to give it my best effort. I believe in myself. If I do that, I believe I can do it. I can do this. You got to keep telling yourself that. And I'm not saying it's easy, but what I will tell you is I've seen many people just like you that have done that in the past. So why not you? Number two, here's some recommendations for how to do your homework, because there's certainly a right way and a wrong way to do homework. Here's one way that I would recommend. So number one, you should have a notebook, even though you are doing problems in my math lab, and you should each section, number your problems, and show all your work and with your solutions. And at the same time as you're doing that, I would make like little red question marks or something like that at any place where you're like, man, I just don't quite see how they got from here to here, or where you're just not understanding it, this doesn't make sense to you. And hopefully at some point you can get those questions answered before you take your test. And along the way, let's say you do like 3 problems and they're all the same kind, and you're like, you know what, I'm probably going to have one of these on the test and I want to make sure I can do it. So you start putting together a little practice test. So put that problem on a piece of paper, on another piece of paper, put the answer or maybe even the solution. And then little by little, you build yourself a practice test. And those can be quite helpful when it comes time to test and make sure, or to study for the test, I should say. And so that's what I would encourage you to do with homework. And here's the bottom line as far as homework's concerned, and really preparation for a test. I think a lot of students fail not because they just don't get math, but they're either not willing or able, or maybe they've never really learned how to put in the time and the effort to be successful. The bottom line is being successful on a test starts with preparing well. So success on your next test starts with the first homework assignment for that test and everything in between. All right, let's move on to number 3. So part of preparing well is getting help when you need it. Now it sounds like a simple thing, but some students are just, hate to ask questions. And honestly, that's a part of learning. That's something you've got to learn how to do if you're not comfortable doing that. You can ask me questions. Brookhaven has tutoring. Currently, it's online. You have family and friends that may be able to help you, or if they can't help you, maybe they can recommend a friend or a tutor, or at least a tutor that you can afford that's reasonable. If you have the money, you can go out and hire a tutor and take advantage of that. You've got My Math Lab, you've got YouTube. You've got to make sure you're getting your questions answered. And really, the most helpful help is when you're like in the middle of a problem and you just can't figure out how you go to that next step. And that's where you want the help, right where you are. You don't want some tutor that's just going to come in and just redo the whole problem for you. You want to understand this key step. What am I not getting here? So, but the bottom line is make sure you're not afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to do that. That's just part of learning. Here's the bottom line. It's your life. Take charge of it and be determined to do whatever it's going to take to be successful. Your success is more than anything up to you. Okay, number 4. So before you take the test, there's an important step that should take place. Now, what happens with a lot of students is they're just barely getting through all that homework that Mr. Smith is giving them. I know it's a lot. And by the time they finish it, it's time the deadline of the test is here and they got to take the test. Ideally, you really don't want to be in that position because it's really important before you take the test that you put it all together and you start sorting some things out. When you're going through one section at a time of homework, it's easy to feel like you got this, and then suddenly it's all mixed up and there's like 2 chapters worth of material. So you got to do some sorting out. You got to be able to put it all together. So one of the ways I help you to do that is I give you a review test. And I would encourage you to take it at least twice. So the first time you take it, if you pass the test and you didn't do any, you didn't have any helps or anything, then that tells you that you're at least ready to pass the test. Maybe you get a 95%, you're like ready to go. Now you may want to go back and spend time to get that other 5%, but you're in a good position. The other thing is after you take the test the first time, at the end of the test you can review it. And I think there's even help there available to help you as well. So take advantage of that review and try to learn from your mistakes. And then when you retake the test again, now some of you may choose to do the whole thing, but I would for most students, you just need to go back and focus on those problems where you had some problems the first round. The other thing I'll tell you is there's about 4 or 5 problems for each concept, and so you'll get a better variety of problems if you do it at least a couple of times, especially those harder problems for you. So let's say there's 10 problems that you would say are kind of difficult, you're kind of concerned about. So what I would encourage you to do is write them on a 5x7 card, write the problem on the front, and write the solution with all the details and the answer on the back. And then those are the ones you're going to study. And by the time the test comes, you want to be able to look at a card and be able to talk through the steps that you're going to be able to need or that you're going to have to take to solve that problem. You can quiz yourself or you can have somebody else quiz you. But if you can do that, you can avoid one of the biggest problems that I hear from students. They're like, Mr. Smith, I saw that problem and I just panicked and I had no idea what to do. And so that's something that can help you in preparing for the test. All right, so you've put in all the work. There's no reason not to be confident in yourself at this point. But I have one last bit of advice before you go in and you start your test. You want to be at your best. I remember when I first started earning my master's degree, in my first test, I studied right up until the test. And when I got into the class and I got my test, I literally stared at it for about 15 minutes because my brain was just shot. You get mentally tired. That's why you want to give yourself at least a 2 hour break and rest your mind before you take your test. And honestly, on the day of the test, you really don't want to be doing much studying, ideally. For me, being my best meant that I got a good night's sleep, I ate well, and and I wanted to be just as alert as possible when I took my test. For me, I like to do it in the morning. The other thing is you want to keep it positive. Now, do not underestimate how important this is. You got to keep telling yourself, I can do this. Whatever you need, it's got to be positive stuff. And let me show you why that's important. Let's say you start your test and you get to number 2 and you don't know how to do it. You're stuck. And like, here you go. Oh my gosh, here we go again. You are so stupid. You just cannot do this math thing. And the next thing you know, you're just ripping yourself apart in the middle of a test. That's the last thing you want to do, especially when you know the stuff. So what you do is you say, okay, I'm going to move on. I'm going to go through all the problems I can do, and any that I'm not able to do, I'll come back and do them at the end. You got to keep it positive. The other thing is there's a time limit on the test. You don't have a half hour to spend on number 2. So you want to move through the problems, come back and do the ones that you got stuck on, and keep it positive. Keep telling yourself encouraging thoughts. You'd be surprised. It can make a huge difference. So 2 last things I want to say in closing here. What happens if you come up short? You put in a lot of time, you gave all the time you could, and you just weren't able to get enough done to prepare for the test, to finish all the homework. Well, here's what I would tell you. When I took Algebra 1, I had a whole year in high school. I took Algebra 2, I had a whole year in high school. I took pre-calculus, I had a whole year to do that. Normally, when you take this course at the college here, you get 16 weeks to do it. And we're doing it in 5 weeks. So think about that. If you're coming in 10 years after having done any kind of math, or if you're just coming in with a poor foundation, it's not a surprise that you're at this point. So the question is, what are you going to do? Are you just going to drop out and hope that maybe you can get it done in the fall? Or are you going to stick with it? That's what I would encourage you to do. As long as you're getting something out of the course and you're making progress. Because if you can get through even half the course and master that, or at least, be able to pass tests or do a decent job, then when you start in the fall or the next time, you're going to be much closer to reaching your goal and passing the course. Some of my best students have been students that retook the course. So, the bottom line is, sometimes we learn from our mistakes, or we build a foundation and then we have something to build on the next time. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. So I hope that you'll hang in there throughout the whole course, at least up to the point where you can drop, which is towards the very end. So the other thing I wanted to say is success breeds success. Remember that. Success breeds success. It's, on the other hand, failure breeds failure. If you fail this first test, and that's kind of what you've done with algebra over your experiences, then you're going to say, well, I'm just not good at this algebra thing, and I'm not surprised. I just can't do this math thing. And it just keeps reinforcing that failure. What you need is your first success. So how do you get that? Well, sometimes you have to dig down deep. You may have to work twice as hard, as twice as many hours, whatever it takes to prepare for that first test, and do everything right. Go in believing, and if you can take that test and do well, I mean, if you get an A or a B, that'd just be awesome, or at least pass the test, then you're like, yes, I can do this. And you start believing in yourself. And really, that's what it's going to take to turn it around. You need some successes to build on, and you keep building on that. And you realize, you know what, I can do this. It's just a lot of hard work. And if you're willing to put in that work, you can be successful. So that's my hope for you this semester or this session. Have a great session.